Good morning, everyone. We are in Mishnayos Chala, Perek Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishnah Ches, Mishnah 8, and I'd like to dedicate, I dedicate today's learning in memory of my mother, Mr. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Maser Rav Yaakov Eliezer. Isas Klovin. Really translated means this is a dough made for a dog. And that's what it was. We're actually talking about a kind of a dough that was meant to feed dogs. And it was made out of flour, and there was lots of bran put into it. A lot of the bran, a lot of the chaff was left into it. So it was typically eaten by dogs. So the question is going to be, what status does this dough made for the dogs have regarding the obligation of separating challah? So Bizman Sharoyim Oichlin, when the shepherds also, Bizman Sharoyim Oichlin, when the shepherds eat from it, I mean, this was a shepherd dog. They used to make this kind of a dough, had lots of bran in it, which wasn't typically what people ate. But now there were times where the dough was made in a way that sometimes this dough was eaten not only by the dogs, but even by the shepherds. So Bizman Sharoyim Oichlin, if the shepherds eat from it, which means it's still edible, even with all the bran in it, it's still edible. Chayeves b'chala, then it's going to be obligated in separating challah from it. Uma'arivin bag, you can make an erev with it. Now, when we talk about erev, we're talking about an erev in the following case. An erev, we're used to the erev that helps us carry outside in the street. But the halacha is that if you have a bunch of houses owned by Jewish people living there, and they share a common courtyard. So there's a rabbinic enactment that they cannot carry from their house to the courtyard, or from the courtyard to their house. Similar to the Torah's prohibition of going from a private domain to a public domain, and vice versa. And the Rabbanan said, the sages said, that the way you can do that, you can carry from one to the other. So if you make an erev, if you mix them all together, which means if everybody contributes towards food that's put in one house, then it's considered like everybody is living in the same place. And once it's basically one house to the courtyard, if we can see it as one house to the courtyard, then you can carry from the courtyard to the house and vice versa. It helps all the houses. So when in order to do this erev, you need to contribute bread. So if this dog's dough was made in a way that the shepherds still eat from it, then it's considered bread. You can use it for an erev. You can use it for a partnership. Now, partnership here means similar to what we just said before, where you have the houses in the courtyard. In the times of the Mishnah, very often what you had was you had houses open to a courtyard, and you had different courtyards open to what's called an alleyway. And the alleyway would lead to the public domain. So you could have a number of courtyards that were open to this one alleyway. The alleyway was surrounded by walls. I think at least by three sides. One side had to be open to get to Rosh Hashanah, if I remember correctly. And but nonetheless, even though it had walls around it, you could not. Again, it was a really enactment. You can't carry from any of the courtyards into the alleyway unless, again, basically everybody from the other courtyards contributes to food that's left in one of the courtyards. And by this, all the courtyards are combined. All the people in the other courtyards are combined together. And then they can carry from the alleyway to the courtyard and vice versa. If this Isas Klovim, if this dog's dough is a dough that the shepherds are eating from, you can use it for that. Mavarchan aleha, and you make the bracha of hamotzi on it, because it's bread. Umizamnit aleha, and when three people eat together, there's a special zimun, they make a special benching, a special reciting of the Berachas Hamazon, the grace after meals together. There's special basically they before actually doing the Berachas Hamazon, they actually invoke that we should bench together, and they bless Hashem's name. It's the standard what we call a mezumin. Again, in order to have an obligation to do zimun, it's got to be bread. V'nases b'yomtiv, and it can be baked on yontif. That's because even though food preparation is permissible on yontif, that's only for people, not for animals. So although this dog will be eating the dough, but there's the edible part, there's a human edible part to it also. Therefore, for that, it's able, the human edible aspect to it also, and therefore it can be baked on Yontif. If you make this dog's dough in a way that it should be considered matzah, then you can use to fulfill your obligation on Pesach. Now, but if let's say the shepherds are not going to be eating from it, and they're not going to be eating from it because it was made in a way that people would not eat it. Right? It contains a very large amount of bran, and therefore people aren't going to eat it. If the shepherds do not eat from it, there's no obligation to separate challah from it. You can't use it for an erev, for the erev chatzeres, for the erev for it to be able to carry from the houses to the courtyard. You can't use it for the combination of the courtyards to use the alleyway. And you don't make the bracha of hamaitzi over it. Right? You wouldn't make the bracha of hamaitzi. You make the bracha of shahakol, the bracha that includes all foods that are eaten. If a person were to eat this, because it's not like it's completely inedible. It's not typically edible by people. Under certain circumstances, under difficult circumstances, people would eat it. So it's not that it's not food. It's food. It may still be food, but it's not bread. And therefore, we don't make hamaitzi on it, but you'd have to make shahakol. You can't use it for a zimun. You can't bake it on yontiv because it's not considered people food. You cannot use it to fulfill your obligation on Pesach, because even if you bake it in a way that it's matzah, it still has to be considered bread, lechem, right? Matzah is also called lechem oni, the bread of affliction. Matzah is also bread. We make hamotzi on it. Nonetheless, it still has to, but in order to be considered bread, it has to be something that people would eat. So therefore, in a situation where the shepherds don't eat from it, it's not bread, and therefore all the halachas don't apply. Nonetheless, whether we're talking about the shepherds eat from it or not, it can become a tameh through the tuma of foods. Food is susceptible to ritual impurity, what we call tuma, ritual impurity. If a sheretz, if one of the 8 crawling animals, if the Torah says if they died, they can spread impurity to other things. If a sheretz, let's say, touches food, a dead body touches food, food is under the same roof as a dead body, it can contract tumah. Now, we're saying that whether the dough people are going to be eating this dough or not, it will either way become tameh tumas eichlin. It now can become tameh as food becomes tameh. Because since, as I said before, since people would eat it under difficult circumstances, it's food. It's not bread. It's not called bread, but it's still food. And if it's still food, then therefore you would be able, therefore it is susceptible to the tumah of food. It will lose its status of food once it becomes inedible even to a dog. Once it's nifsa machilas kelev, once it's even a dog wouldn't eat it, that's how bad it is, that's how spoiled it is. Even if a dog wouldn't eat it, then it already loses its status as food. But until then, even though people typically aren't eating it, it can still have the status of food. And therefore, it would be susceptible to the tumah of that food can contract. However, it's not bread for all the other laws that we mentioned before. We continue with the laws of Lashon Harah, Klal Ches, chapter 8 from the Chavetz Chaim, and we are in paragraph Sif Yud, paragraph 10. Now we will explain to whom is it forbidden to speak Lashon Harah. Now, so Chavetz Chaim pointed out at the beginning of this chapter, he's not necessarily teaching you things that are novel that you wouldn't figure out on your own. But he wants to elaborate on all the details to make sure it's clear to everyone what you may or may not do. One should know that in Shum Chilik B'Isar HaSipar, there is no difference when it comes to speaking Lashon Harah, whether the other people you're speaking to are your relatives or non-relatives, or l'ishta, to your wife. Just because you're married to someone And just because share the day's events with someone doesn't mean you should be doesn't give you the permission to speak Lashon Hara. Now, unless this piece of information that would be categorized typically as Lashon Hara is something that you need to let her know about, because of the benefit that she will have from this. She runs a store and she gives on credit. And the problem is she's giving credit to people that aren't credible, people that aren't going to pay back afterwards. It's going to be very difficult to get the money from them. Therefore, he tells them their bad nature, and she warns her not to lend to them. Same thing, a partner can tell his partner. You can warn your partner people that you don't trust, or anything similar to that. Again, it's all for the purpose of protecting the business. Let's say you don't yourself have any kind of personal experience to know this, but you've heard it about them. You can still tell her about what you've heard about them and to warn her, even though you're not allowed to believe what you've heard about them, nonetheless, to take it into consideration because of the possibility that it could be true, and to protect yourself because of that, that's permissible. But under these circumstances, do not tell it over to your wife or to your partner in a way that you give the impression that this is for sure that way. I've heard this about the person. Therefore, be careful. Don't lend him. Don't give him on credit. So basically, the same way, you're allowed to, again, take into consideration. You're allowed to consider the possibility of it and protect yourself. And that's where you're allowed to tell it over to your wife, to your partner. At the end of the day, though, if you're only doing it based on rumor, which allows you to protect yourself, make sure it's clear to the person you're telling it over to that it's only based on what you've heard. It's not because you know it for sure. Because again, the same way you can't accept it as the truth, they can't accept it as the truth. So you want to make sure that when you're telling this, when you're warning them, that they don't take it as the truth, because that would then be that for them, that would be considered they're accepting Lashon Hara. But otherwise, if it's not for any kind of constructive purpose, there's no difference if it's your relative or it's your wife. People make a mistake that they go in and they tell their wives, or the wives tell their husbands, about what happened to them with so-and-so. Any interaction they have with someone, they share it with their spouse. Whether it happened in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall, in the shul, or it happened in the market. Besides for the fact it's Lashon Hara, just to say over what happened, the bad interaction you have with this person and how, what this person did to you, you will be increasing, you'll be causing or increasing through this quarreling. Because a spouse can take these kinds of things very personal and bear a grudge, and because of that, land up getting into a little spat with other members of that person's family. And she may say to you, no, don't let him do that to you, fight back. And it could also come out that if you don't stand for yourself, that she's going to herself look down at you. And therefore be very careful one should not reveal this to his wife, to his spouse. Basically, people, feel that they share their day and their experiences with their spouses, especially if something is bothering them. The thing is, you have to be very careful with that. You have to be careful when you're sharing something that bothers you, because you don't want that to cause that the other person you're sharing it with is going to take it. It's going to take it out of hand. So you got to be very careful. It's not like there isn't an idea that something's bothering you. Share it with your spouse. To get it off your chest. That's important, but you have to be very careful with that. Make it very clear. That and it should be very, very careful. Be careful, even if you'd like to do that, make sure it's not going to get out of hand. Make sure the other person who's going to hear it isn't going to take it for sure and create a problem with it. So it's not necessarily that you can't sometimes unburden yourself to someone, but you have to your spouse, But you have to be very careful to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand, that it doesn't turn into something that it shouldn't turn into. And therefore, in essence, the point of the Chavetz Chaim is that it's Lashon Harah. There's speaking to your wife or to your husband, telling them anything that happened to you because you just want to share with them what happened to you, is Lashon Harah. The only time it's not Lashon Harah if there's some kind of constructive purpose. And even when there is constructive purpose, one has to be very careful to make sure that things don't get out of hand, even though your intention was for constructive purpose to tell it over. Have a wonderful day.